"You let me sleep in your house." He said. Mafia boss removed his hood and claimed her, as his obsession in the rain in Red Harbor did not wash things clean. It only seemed to make the grime stick harder. It was a heavy, suffocating downpour that rattled the loose shingles of Ella Donovan's inherited Victorian house, a sound like 1,000 knuckles rapping against the roof. Ella parked her rusting sedan in the driveway, the headlights cutting through the deluge to illuminate the peeling white paint of the porch railing. She killed the engine, letting out a long, ragged breath that fogged the windshield. Her double shift at the diner had been brutal. Her feet throbbed in rhythm with the windshield wipers she had just turned off, and the tips of her fingers were wrinkled and smelling of stale coffee and bleach. All she wanted was to heat up a can of soup, wrap herself in 3 blankets to combat the drafty living room, and sleep until her alarm screamed at 5 in the morning. She grabbed her bag, pulled her coat tighter around her throat, and made a dash for the porch stairs. Her boot hit the bottom step, and she froze. The motion sensor light, which usually flickered on for stray cats or blowing trash, buzzed to life. Its yellow glow washed over a heap of dark fabric collapsed directly in front of her front door. It looked like a pile of wet laundry left out to rot, but then the pile moved. A low, guttural groan rose above the sound of the rain. Ella gripped her keys, the jagged metal biting into her palm. Her first instinct, honed by years of living alone in a dying city, was to back away, get in her car, and lock the doors. This was Red Harbor. People did not help strangers on their porches. They called the police, or they drove away. But the figure shifted again, a hand sliding out from beneath the heavy, soaked fabric. Even in the poor light, the blood was unmistakable. It was not a smear. It was a pool, mixing with the rainwater on the gray wood, dark and slick. Compassion, that treacherous instinct that had cost her so much in the past, overrode her survival skills. She took a step up. "Hey!" she called out, her voice trembling only slightly. "You can't be here." The man did not answer. He just breathed, a wet, rasping sound that suggested broken ribs, or worse. Ella moved closer, her heart hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. The hood of his sweatshirt was pulled low, obscuring his face in shadow. He was large, broad-shouldered even in his collapsed state, and the sheer size of him should have sent her running. Instead, she knelt. "Sir?" she asked. She reached out, touching his shoulder. He flinched violently, a reflex of violence that died as soon as it started, his strength failing him. His head lolled toward her. He was soaking wet, shivering so hard his teeth were chattering, and the heat radiating off him hit her hand through the soaked cotton of his hoodie. "Help," he rasped. It was barely a word, just a vibration of air. Ella looked at the dark street behind her. The police in this neighborhood took 40 minutes to respond to a break-in. If they came at all, an ambulance would cost him thousands of dollars he likely did not have, assuming he was just some local drunk or a kid who got jumped. And if he was something worse, if he was trouble, calling the cops might bring trouble to her door. "Damn it," she whispered. She unlocked the door and shoved it open. Okay, listen to me. You have to help me. I can't lift you." She hooked her arms under his shoulders. He smelled of metallic copper, rain and expensive cologne that seemed out of place in the rotting humidity of Red Harbor. With a grunt of effort that strained her lower back, she hauled him upward. He seemed to understand, his boots scrabbling for purchase on the slick wood, driving his weight forward, together. They stumbled into the hallway. Ella kicked the door shut behind them, sealing out the storm, and the sudden silence of the house felt deafening. She dragged him into the spare room on the first floor, a small space she used for storage, where an old, dust-sheeted mattress sat on a frame. She let him drop onto it. He groaned again, curling onto his side, clutching his abdomen. Ella flicked on the lamp. The light revealed the severity of the situation. The hoodie was black, but the stain spreading across the stomach was darker, glistening and wet. "I need to see," she said, her voice firmer now. Panic was useless. "I need to see where you are hurt." The man's hand shot out, gripping her wrist. His fingers were calloused, his grip iron-hard despite his condition. For the first time, she saw his jaw, square, covered in dark stubble, and his mouth. set in a grim line of pain. The hood still shadowed his eyes. "No doctors," he gritted out. "No cops." Ella stared at his hand on her wrist. "You are bleeding on my floor. If you die here, that is going to be a lot of paperwork for me. Let go." He held her gaze, or what she assumed was his gaze from the darkness of the hood, for a second longer, then released her. His arm fell back to the mattress heavily. Ella hurried to the kitchen, grabbing her first aid kit and a bowl of warm water. When she returned, he had not moved. She worked quickly, cutting away the fabric of his shirt. The wound was a jagged slice across his side. It was ugly and angry, but it did not look like it had hit any organs. It looked like a knife wound, defensive, glancing off the ribs. She cleaned it, her hands steady despite the adrenaline coursing through her veins. He did not make a sound as she poured antiseptic over the raw flesh, though his muscles seized tight as rock. She bandaged him tightly, wrapping the gauze around his torso. When she was finished, she stood back, wiping her hands on a towel. He was breathing easier now, the immediate crisis managed. "Who are you?" she asked. He remained silent. He had pulled the blanket she provided up to his chin, turning his face away from the light. "Look," Ella said, crossing her arms. "I don't know who you are. And honestly, looking at that cut, I probably don't want to know. You might be a runaway, or a criminal, or just someone with really bad luck. But this is my house." She stepped closer to the bed, forcing her presence to fill the room. "You can sleep here tonight, one night because it is storming and you are hurt. But tomorrow morning, you are gone. Do you understand?" The man on the bed lay still for a long moment. Then he gave a single, curt nod. "Good," Ella said. She backed out of the room, locking the door from the outside. She dragged a heavy wooden chair under the handle, just in case. She didn't sleep that night. She sat in her living room with a baseball bat across her lap, listening to the rain and the silence of the stranger in the other room. Morning brought a gray, diffuse light that did little to cheer up the interior of the house. Ella woke with a stiff neck, realizing she had dozed off in the armchair. The house was silent. She moved the chair and unlocked the spare room door, pushing it open slowly. The man was still there. He had not vanished into the night as she had hoped. He was tossing restlessly, tangled in the sheets, his skin flushed with an unnatural heat. "Hey," she said softly. Stepping inside, he didn't wake. Ella touched his forehead. He was burning up. The wound must have been dirtier than she thought. Infection was setting in fast. "One night," she muttered to herself, frustration warring with worry. "You promised one night." She couldn't kick a delirious man out onto the street, but she also couldn't handle this alone. She pulled her phone from her pocket and dialed the only person she trusted, Doctor. Laura Price answered on the second ring. "Ella, everything okay?" "Not exactly," Ella said, keeping her voice low. "Laura, I need a favor, a house call, and you can't ask questions, and you absolutely cannot call the police." 20 minutes later, Laura was in the spare room, her face set in a mask of professional focus as she examined the stranger. She administered a strong antibiotic injection and stitched the wound properly, something Ella's shaking hands hadn't been able to do the night before. "He is lucky," Laura said, packing her bag. She glanced at the man, whose breathing had deepened into a more natural sleep. "He has a strong constitution. The fever should break by tonight, but Ella—" "Who is he?" "I don't know," Ella admitted. Laura sighed, adjusting her glasses. "He has scars. Old ones, bullet wounds, knife marks. This isn't a bar fight. This is a lifestyle. Be careful." "I will," Ella promised. "Thank you, Laura." When Laura left, Ella sat in the chair in the corner of the room, watching him. Around noon, he woke up. This time, when he moved, he sat up, wincing but clear-headed. He pushed the hood back. Ella stopped breathing for a second. He was striking. Dark hair that fell over his forehead, a strong, broken nose that gave him a dangerous cast, and eyes that were dark, intelligent, and calculating. He looked at her, and she felt like she was being assessed for weaknesses. "You're still here," she said. "Fever," he murmured. His voice was rough, unused. Passed out. My friend is a doctor. She patched you up, said the fever will break soon. He went still. You called someone. A friend, Ella said quickly. No police. I promised you. He studied her, his gaze sweeping over her tired face, her messy bun, the worn uniform she was already dressed in for her evening shift. He seemed to be looking for the lie, the deception. When he found none, his shoulders relaxed, just a fraction. Nick, he said. It was obviously a lie, or at least an abbreviation, but Ella took it. I'm Ella. Why? He asked. Why help? Ella stood up, smoothing her apron. Because you were bleeding on my porch, Nick, and because I know what it's like to have nowhere to go. She checked her watch. There is water and painkillers on the nightstand. There is soup on the stove. Help yourself if you can walk. I have to go to work. If you are not here when I get back, lock the front door behind you. She turned and left before he could answer. She didn't see the way Nico Moretti watched her go, a look of profound confusion and fascination dawning in his dark eyes. The cafe, the Rusty Spoon, was usually a sanctuary for Ella, a place where the rhythm of pouring coffee and stacking plates kept her mind off her mounting bills. But tonight, the air was thick with tension. Mr. Camden, the new owner who had bought the place 3 weeks ago, was pacing behind the counter. He was a sweaty, nervous man with wandering eyes and hands that lingered too long. "You're late, Donovan," Camden snapped as she tied her apron, though she was 5 minutes early. "I'm here now." "Mr. Camden," she said, keeping her head down. Throughout the shift, Camden was a hovering shadow. He brushed past her in the narrow walkway behind the counter, his hip checking hers unnecessarily. He leaned over her while she was entering orders, his breath hot on her neck. "Business is slow, Ella," he said, cornering her near the dish pit. He reached out, his hand sliding down her arm, his fingers squeezing her bicep. "I might have to cut some shifts, maybe lose a waitress." Ella pulled her arm away, her skin crawling. "I need these hours. Mr. Camden, I'm the best server you have." "Maybe," he leered, stepping closer, trapping her against the sink. "But maybe there are other ways you can show me how dedicated you are. We could discuss your schedule in my office after we close." "I have to get home," Ella said coldly, pushing past him. "My shift ends at 10. "We will see about next week's schedule then," he called after her, his voice dripping with petty malice. "Maybe you won't be on it at all." Ella worked the rest of the night with a knot of anxiety in her stomach. Losing this job meant losing the house. It was that simple. When she finally stumbled home through the drizzle, the house was dark. She assumed Nick had left, but when she unlocked the door, the smell of toasted bread and garlic hit her. He was sitting in the kitchen. He was still pale, and he moved stiffly, but he was up. He had found a loaf of stale bread and a can of tomatoes, and somehow turned it into something that smelled like heaven. "You stayed," she said, dropping her bag on the table. "Couldn't walk far." He lied. In truth, Nico had forced himself up hours ago. He had watched from the window as she walked down the street. He had seen the way she slumped, the weight of the world on her shoulders. "Rough night?" he asked. Ella sank into a chair, rubbing her temples. "You could say that. New boss. He is difficult." "Difficult how?" Nico asked. His voice was casual, but his eyes were sharp. "He touches," Ella said, too tired to filter her words. "He threatens to fire me if I don't play along. He cut my hours today because I walked away from him." Nico said nothing. He turned back to the stove, stirring the sauce, but his knuckles on the wooden spoon were white. Nico waited until Ella was asleep upstairs. The effort to move was agonizing. His stitches pulled with every step, and his head swam with the remnants of the fever. But pain was an old friend to Nico Moretti. Rage, however, was a fuel that burned hotter than any fever. He slipped out the back door into the damp night. He knew the type of man Ella had described. Red Harbor was full of them. Small men with a little bit of power who thought they were kings. He found the address of the cafe easily enough, and from there, the owner's registration in the office. Camden lived in a shabby apartment complex 3 blocks away. "Mr. Camden was unlocking his front door when a hand slammed it shut, pinning him against the wood. "Hey, what the—" Camden started, but the words died in his throat. A man in a dark hoodie stood over him. He smelled of rain and copper. He held a rusted screwdriver, something he had swiped from Ella's tool drawer, and pressed the tip of it gently against the soft underside of Camden's chin. "Quiet," Nico whispered. The single word was more terrifying than a scream. Camden trembled, his keys jingling in his shaking hand. "Take my wallet. I have cash. I don't want your money," Nico said softly. He leaned in, his voice a low rumble. "I want you to listen very carefully. You have a waitress, Ella." Camden's eyes widened. She is a good worker," Nico continued, the screwdriver pressing harder, just enough to dent the skin without breaking it. "She needs her hours, and she needs personal space, a lot of personal space. If you touch her again, if you look at her wrong, if you even think about cutting her pay, I will come back, and I won't be using a screwdriver next time." He stepped back, the shadow of the hood swallowing his features. "Do we understand each other?" "Yes," Camden squeaked. "Yes, I understand. Good night, Mr. Camden." The next day, Ella braced herself as she walked into the Rusty Spoon. She expected to be fired. Instead, "Mr." Camden jumped when the door chime rang. He looked pale, like he hadn't slept. "Good morning, Ella," he stammered, refusing to make eye contact. I put you down for overtime this week, if you want it, and I'll be in the back office. I won't bother you." He scurried away like a frightened rat. Ella stood there, bewildered. She touched the counter, wondering if she was dreaming. The shift was peaceful, the tips were good. She walked home feeling lighter than she had in months. When she got home, the house was warm, the table was set. 2 plates of pasta sat steaming, a simple salad on the side. Nico was waiting. He looked better today, the color returning to his face. He had found a razor in the bathroom and shaved the stubble, revealing a sharp, handsome jawline that made Ella's breath hitch. "You cooked again," she said, closing the door. "Least I could do," he said. "Rent." They sat down to eat. For a long time, the only sound was the clink of forks against chipped porcelain. The food was incredible, rich and flavorful, transforming the cheap ingredients into something restaurant quality. "This is amazing," Ella said, taking a bite. "Where did you learn to cook like this?" "My grandmother," Nico said, the ghost of a smile touching his lips. "She believed you could solve any problem with enough basil and garlic." Ella laughed. It was a genuine, bright sound that seemed to startle the dust motes in the air. Nico stopped eating. He watched her, transfixed, in his world. A world of concrete, blood, and betrayals. Laughter was a rare currency. Seeing her head thrown back, her eyes crinkling at the corners, stirred something deep in his chest. It was a primal, possessive thump that he hadn't felt in years. "So," Ella said, recovering, wiping a tear from her eye, "my boss was a different person today. It was weird. He was terrified of me." Nico took a sip of water, his face a mask of innocence. "Maybe he realized he was lucky to have you." "Maybe," Ella smiled, reaching for the salt shaker. At the same time, she noticed the candle in the center of the table, a cheap emergency candle he must have found, was flickering wildly in the draft. She leaned forward to cup her hand around the flame to steady it. Nico reached out at the same moment to move the shaker for her. Their hands brushed. The contact was electric. Ella froze. His skin was warm, his fingers rough but gentle. For a second, neither of them moved. She looked up, locking eyes with him. The air in the kitchen suddenly felt very thin. The domesticity of the scene, the pasta, the rain outside, the candlelight warped into something sharper, hotter. She saw the hunger in his eyes. It wasn't the hunger of a man who hadn't eaten. It was the hunger of a man who wanted to consume her. Her heart raced. She didn't pull away. She wanted to lean in. She wanted to know what he tasted like. Nico's fingers twitched, as if he were about to lace them through hers. He inhaled sharply, his pupils dilating. Then, the mask slammed back down. The coldness returned to his expression. He pulled his hand back as if he had been burned. "I should clean up," he said abruptly, his voice gruff. He stood up, scraping his chair against the floor, breaking the spell. Ella sat there, her hand still hovering near the candle, her skin tingling where he had touched her. She watched him turn his back to her at the sink, his shoulders rigid. She didn't know who this man was, but as she looked at his broad back, she realized with a shiver that the danger he posed wasn't just physical. He was going to be dangerous to her heart. The sound of hammering woke Ella on Tuesday morning. It was a steady, rhythmic thudding that vibrated through the floorboards of her second-story bedroom, distinct from the usual groans and creaks of the settling Victorian house. She pulled her robe tight around her waist and descended the stairs, her hand trailing along the banister that had been wobbling for 3 years. When she reached the bottom, she paused. The front door, which usually stuck in the frame due to humidity, was wide open. Nico was kneeling on the threshold, a screwdriver in his hand. He had dismantled the strike plate and was expertly realigning the hinges. "What are you doing?" Ella asked, her voice thick with sleep. Nico didn't look up immediately. He gave the screw one final, decisive twist before testing the door. It swung shut with a satisfying, solid click, a sound Ella had not heard since she was a teenager. "Draft was getting in," Nico said, finally standing. He wiped his hands on a rag he had tucked into the back pocket of the jeans she had bought him from a thrift store the day before. He moved with less stiffness now. The antibiotic course doctor Price had prescribed was working, and the color had returned to his skin, replacing the sickly gray pallor with an olive tone that made his dark eyes seem even more piercing. "I did not ask you to fix my house, Nick," Ella said, though she couldn't suppress the small surge of gratitude. That draft had been doubling her heating bill. "I'm staying under your roof," he replied simply, walking past her toward the kitchen. "I do not like owing debts, and your lock was useless. A stiff wind could have broken in here." Ella followed him. "You said you were leaving. You said a few days." "I will," he said. He opened the fridge and pulled out the carton of eggs. "Soon. I just need to make sure my legs can carry me far enough so I don't end up on another stranger's porch." It was a lie, and they both sensed it, physically. Nico was capable of leaving. He moved with the predatory grace of a man who had regained his strength, but the world outside was still hunting for him, and inside these peeling wallpapered walls, he had found a strange, suspended reality that he was reluctant to shatter. Over the next few days, his presence in the house deepened. It wasn't intrusive, it was foundational. He fixed the dripping faucet in the bathroom that had tortured Ella with its rhythmic plinking for months. He regrouted the tiles in the entryway. He was quiet, efficient, and ghost-like, often disappearing into the spare room when she wanted space, but emerging whenever she needed help with a jar or a heavy box. One evening, the rain had let up, leaving behind a heavy, wet mist that clung to the windows. Ella was sitting on the living room rug, sorting through a box of old photographs she had dragged down from the attic. Nico sat in the armchair, a book in his hand that he wasn't reading. He was watching her. "Who are they?" he asked, nodding toward a faded Polaroid in her hand. Ella looked at the image. A man and a woman, laughing, holding a small child between them on a beach. "My parents," Ella said softly. "This was taken in Florida, before the accident." Nico closed his book. He leaned forward, his elbows on his knees, giving her his full, intense attention. "Accident?" "Car crash," Ella said, placing the photo gently on the carpet. "I was 12. Drunk driver crossed the median on the interstate. They died instantly. I was at a sleepover, so I wasn't with them. 12 is too young to be alone," Nico said. His voice was low, lacking the usual platitudes people offered. He didn't say "I'm sorry." He just acknowledged the weight of the fact. "My aunt took me in for a few years, but she was sick. When she passed, she left me at this house. It was already falling apart then." Ella looked around the room, at the water stains on the ceiling she couldn't afford to paint over. "People tell me to sell it. They say it is a money pit, but it is the only thing that is actually mine. I raised myself in these halls. I learned how to fix the furnace and how to stretch a dollar until it screamed. Giving it up would feel like giving up on myself. Nico looked at her, really looked at her. In his world, power was inherited or seized through violence. Loyalty was bought, but Ella possessed a different kind of strength, a resilience forged in solitude. She had no soldiers, no weapons, yet she defended her small, broken kingdom with a ferocity that humbled him. "You've done well," Nico said. The praise, simple and stark, made Ella blush. She reached up to tuck a strand of hair behind her ear. As the sleeve of her oversized sweater slid down, the lamplight caught a discoloration on her forearm. Nico's eyes narrowed instantly. The air in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. "What is that?" Ella quickly pulled her sleeve down. "Nothing. I bumped into a table at work." Nico was out of the chair before she could blink. He didn't grab her, but he knelt in front of her, his presence overwhelming. "Show me." "Nick, it's fine." "Ella," she sighed and rolled up the sleeve. 3 distinct finger-shaped bruises marred the pale skin of her forearm. They were turning a sickly yellow-green, but the edges were fresh. "Aggravated, mister." Camden had not stopped. Despite Nico's warning, the man's ego was bruised, and he had taken to cornering her in blind spots, gripping her arm hard when he hissed instructions, testing the boundaries of the threat he had received. Nico stared at the marks. His face went perfectly blank. It was a terrifying lack of expression, a void where human emotion should have been. His finger hovered over the bruise, not touching it, as if he were afraid his own rage would transmit through his skin and hurt her further. "He touched you again," Nico stated. "It wasn't a question." "He didn't do anything major," Ella reasoned, pulling her arm back. "He just grabs me when he is angry. He's a small man on a power trip. I can handle him." "You shouldn't have to handle him," Nico whispered. He stood up abruptly and walked to the window, staring out at the dark, mist-shrouded street. His reflection in the glass was a specter of vengeance. "Go to bed, Ella. You look tired." Ella went to bed, feeling a strange unease settling in her stomach. She didn't know that while she slept. Nico slipped out of the house for the second time. This time, there were no warnings. The next morning, the local news in Red Harbor ran a small story about an assault downtown. A business owner, Arthur Camden, had been found in the alley behind his establishment. He wasn't dead, but he had been beaten with a precision that baffled the responding officers. Broken kneecaps, shattered fingers on his right hand, and a jaw wired shut. He had been left alive, but clearly, a message had been delivered. When Ella heard the news from a coworker over the phone, she gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. She looked at Nico, who was calmly drinking coffee at her kitchen table, reading a newspaper he had walked to the corner store to buy. "Did you hear?" she asked, breathless. "Mr. Camden, someone beat him up last night. They say he won't be back at work for months." Nico lowered the paper. His expression was one of mild, polite interest. "Is that so? Red Harbor is a dangerous place at night. A man like that probably has many enemies." Ella studied him. He looked so domestic, so normal, and yet, the memory of the blank look on his face when he saw her bruise sent a shiver down her spine. She didn't ask him. She wasn't sure she wanted the answer. 2 days later, the morning sun was streaming through the kitchen window, a rare occurrence in the city. Ella walked into the kitchen yawning, expecting to find coffee already made. Instead, she stopped dead in the doorway. Nico was standing by the sink, drinking a glass of water. He was shirtless. She'd seen him injured, bandaged and bloody, but she had never seen him like this. Healed and standing at his full height, his back was a landscape of violence. Scars crisscrossed his skin, white lines of old knife fights, the puckered crater of a bullet wound near his shoulder blade. But what dominated his skin was the ink. Covering his upper back, stretching from shoulder to shoulder, was a massive, intricate tattoo. It was a black lion roaring, its mane tangled with thorns and roses, holding a shield with a stylized letterum in the center. The artistry was breathtaking, the lines sharp and aggressive. He heard her gasp and turned around slowly. The movement rippled through the muscles of his torso and abdomen. The bandage on his side was smaller now. Just a patch. Sorry, Ella stammered, averting her eyes, her face heating up. I didn't know you were. I just came for coffee. Nico didn't scramble to cover himself. He set the glass down, watching her reaction. He saw the curiosity in her eyes as they flickered back to the tattoo. It's quite a piece, she murmured, gesturing vaguely to his shoulder. The lion. Family crest. Nico lied smoothly. It was the insignia of the Moretti crime family, a mark that would make any low-level criminal in the state wet themselves with fear. To Ella, it was just ink. A reminder of where I come from. It looks heavy, she said, the words slipping out before she could stop it. It is, Nico replied. He grabbed a t-shirt from the back of the chair and pulled it on, concealing the monster on his back. Coffee is in the pot. Later that afternoon, the reality of Ella's situation crashed back in. It was the end of the month. She sat at the kitchen table, a calculator and a stack of envelopes spread out before her. The heating bill, the property tax, the groceries. The numbers weren't adding up. With Camden in the hospital, the cafe was closed for a few days while the police investigated, which meant 0 tips. She put her head in her hands, letting out a frustrated groan. A shadow fell over the table. Nico placed a stack of cash on the Formica surface next to her elbow. It was a thick roll of bills, secured with a rubber band. It had to be at least $2,000. Ella stared at it, then looked up at him. What is this? Help, Nico said. You're short. Take it. Ella's spine stiffened. She pushed the money back toward him. I can't take this, Nick. I don't even know where you got it. I had some stashed, he said. It is clean. I don't need it right now. You do. I'm not a charity case, Ella said, her voice rising. I have handled my own bills since I was 18. I don't need you to swoop in and save me just because I'm having a bad month. It isn't charity, Nico argued, his voice hard. He wasn't used to people refusing money. In his world, money was the only language everyone spoke. You saved my life. Consider it payment for the room, for the food. I didn't help you for money. Ella stood up, her eyes flashing. I helped you because you were dying. If I take this, then it changes things. It makes this transactional. I won't do it. She stormed out of the kitchen, leaving Nico standing there with the cash in his hand. He looked at the money, then at the empty doorway, feeling a strange mixture of frustration and admiration. She was drowning, yet she refused to grab the lifeline if it meant compromising her pride. That night, the storm returned with a vengeance. The wind howled around the eaves, and the old house groaned in protest. Around 9 in the evening, a transformer blew somewhere down the street with a loud pop, and the house plunged into absolute darkness. Great, Ella muttered from the living room sofa. Stay put, Nico's voice came from the dark. I know where the candles are. A moment later, the strike of a match flared. Nico moved around the room, lighting the candles Ella kept on the mantel and the coffee table. The golden glow softened the room, casting long, dancing shadows against the walls. It turned the shabby furniture into something cozy, intimate. He sat down on the sofa next to her, not close enough to touch, but close enough that she could feel the heat radiating from him. The storm raged outside, but here it was quiet. Suspended in the amber light, Ella hugged her knees to her chest. The fight about the money seemed distant now. I hate the dark, she confessed quietly. It makes the house feel too big. You are safe, Nico said. He shifted, turning his body toward her. The candlelight flickered in his eyes, making them look like pools of obsidian. How do you know? She asked, looking at him. You don't know what's out there. I know what is in here, he said. The silence stretched, charged with a tension that had been building for days. It was in the way he watched her eat, the way she looked at his hands, the way they danced around each other in the narrow hallways. Why did you really stay, Nick? Ella asked, her voice barely a whisper. You could have left days ago. You are healed enough. Nico looked at her mouth, then up to her eyes. The truth pressed against his teeth. He wanted to tell her everything, that he was the underboss of the Moretti family, that he was a man who ordered deaths as easily as ordering dinner, that she was sitting next to a monster. but he couldn't destroy this yet. "You let me sleep in your house when no one else would," he said, his voice rough with an emotion he couldn't name. "People usually look at me and see something to fear, or something to use. You just saw a person." Ella's breath hitched. She uncurled her legs, turning to face him fully. She reached out, her hand trembling slightly, and touched his cheek. His stubble was rough against her fingertips. Nico leaned into her touch. It was an involuntary movement, a surrender. He closed his eyes for a second, savoring the gentleness of her hand. "You aren't a monster, Nick," she whispered. He opened his eyes. "You have no idea." Ella leaned forward. The distance between them closed. She saw the conflict in his gaze, the war between desire and restraint. She didn't care about the mystery anymore. She just wanted to bridge the gap. She pressed her lips to his. It was slow, tentative at first. She tasted peppermint tea and rain. Nico froze, his entire body going rigid. Then a groan vibrated in his chest. He brought his hand up, tangling his fingers in the hair at the nape of her neck, and kissed her back. It wasn't gentle. It was desperate. It was the kiss of a man who had been starving for a lifetime. His mouth moved over hers with a possessive heat that made Ella's head spin. She gripped his shoulders, pulling him closer, wanting to climb inside his skin. The kiss deepened, becoming sensual, wet and consuming. Nico's hand slid down her back, pressing her against him. For a moment, he forgot the danger. He forgot the dorsas, the betrayal, the blood on his hands. There was only Ella, soft and alive and willing. But then, reality pierced the fog. If he took this further, if he claimed her now, he would drag her into the abyss with him. She would be the girlfriend of a mafia boss, a target for every enemy he had ever made. He couldn't do that, not until the threat was gone. He tore his mouth away from hers, breathing heavily, his forehead resting against hers. "No," he rasped. Ella blinked, her lips swollen and red, her eyes hazy with desire. "Nick?" He pulled back, putting a few inches of space between them. His hands were shaking. "Not yet," he whispered. "We can't. Not yet." He stood up abruptly, the sudden movement making the candle flames dance wildly. I need to check the back door." He walked away into the shadows of the kitchen, leaving Ella sitting alone on the couch, her heart pounding a frantic rhythm against her ribs, her skin burning where he had touched her. Ella slept fitfully that night. Her dreams were a chaotic mix of shadow and fire. She dreamed of Nico, but he wasn't the man who fixed her door. He was standing in the dark, holding a gun, his back turned to her, the lion tattoo roaring silently. In the dream, she ran toward him, but the faster she ran, the further away he got. She woke up tangled in her sheets, sweating, the lingering sensation of his lips on hers still ghosting over her mouth. She knew he was dangerous. Every instinct she had screamed it, the scars, the money, the way he moved, the sudden violence that had befallen Camden. But the fear was inextricably tangled with a magnetic pull she couldn't resist. Downstairs, Nico did not sleep. He sat in the dark kitchen, his phone in his hand. It was a burner phone he had acquired 2 days ago. He dialed a number he knew by heart. "It's me," he said when the line clicked open. There was a stunned silence on the other end. "Boss, we thought you were dead. The family is in chaos." "Not yet," Nico said, his voice cold and commanding. The persona of Nick was gone. Nico Moretti was back. "Listen to me carefully. I am in Red Harbor. I need eyes on a location, a house on Elm Street, number 402, and a cafe called the Rusty Spoon." "We're on it, boss. Do we move in?" "No," Nico ordered. "You watch. You stay in the shadows. If anyone from the Dorsa crew gets within a mile of that girl, you end them. But she sees nothing. She knows nothing. Do you understand?" "Understood." Nico hung up. He looked up toward the ceiling, toward the room where Ella lay sleeping. He would protect her. He would burn the whole city down if he had to. But for now, he would watch from the dark, a guardian devil waiting for the right moment to step into the light. "You let me sleep in your house," he said, Mafia boss removed his hood and claimed her, as his obsession. The silence in the house on Wednesday morning was different. It was not the companionable silence of two people moving through their separate routines, nor was it the tense silence of unsaid words that had filled the air the night of the power outage. It was a hollow, echoing vacancy. Ella stood in the kitchen, staring at the empty coffee pot. The mug Nico usually used, a chipped ceramic cup with a faded floral pattern, was sitting on the drying rack. Clean and cold, his boots were gone from the mat by the back door. The leather jacket she had found for him at the thrift store was missing from the hook. He had not said goodbye. A cold knot of anxiety tightened in her stomach, heavy and sickening. She had known this was coming. She had told herself every day that he was a transient thing, a storm passing through her life, but seeing the empty space where he had stood only 12 hours ago made her chest ache in a way she hadn't expected. He had just walked out, disappearing back into whatever dangerous current had washed him up on her porch in the first place. She went to work with a numbness that made her movements mechanical. The cafe was busy, the lunch rush demanding her full attention, but her mind kept drifting back to the empty house. Had he left a note? Had she missed it? Or was he just the kind of man who cut ties without looking back? By the time she clocked out, the sun was setting behind the jagged skyline of Red Harbor, casting long, bruised shadows across the cracked pavement. She drove home on autopilot, dreading the moment she would unlock the door and confirm that she was alone again. She turned the key in the lock and pushed the door open. The house was dark, but the smell hit her instantly, the sharp, metallic tang of ozone and fresh blood. "Nick?" she called out, her heart leaping into her throat. She flipped the hallway light on. He was sitting on the bottom step of the staircase, his elbows resting on his knees, his head hanging low. He looked like he had been through a war. His knuckles were split and raw, the skin around them angry and red. There was a fresh bruise blooming along his jawline, dark purple against the olive skin, and his shirt, the one she had bought him, was torn at the shoulder. Ella dropped her keys. The sound shattered the quiet. Nico looked up. His eyes were wild, filled with a turbulent mix of adrenaline and exhaustion. When he saw her, the wildness receded, replaced by a guarded shame. "You came back," she breathed. "I said I would." He rasped. Ella crossed the distance between them in 3 strides. She didn't care about the blood or the danger radiating off him. She reached out, taking his face in her hands, tilting his head to inspect the bruise. "Where were you?" she demanded, her voice shaking. "I thought you left. I thought you were gone for good." Nico flinched at her touch, not from pain, but from the searing contact. He pulled back gently, catching her wrists and lowering her hands. "I had to take care of something," he said evasively. "Loose ends. Loose ends don't bruise your face." "Nick," Ella countered, her fear transmuting into anger. "You disappear for 14 hours, and you come back looking like you went 10 rounds with a heavyweight. What is going on?" He stood up, towering over her, his presence suddenly sucking the air out of the hallway. "I told you. Ella, it is better if you don't ask." "Stop saying that," she shouted, stepping back. "I am not a child. You are living in my house. You are eating my food. You kissed me. Do not tell me I am better off not knowing when you bring this violence to my doorstep." Nico ran a hand through his hair, wincing as the movement pulled at his bruised ribs. He looked trapped, caught between his instinct to protect her through silence and the undeniable reality that she deserved the truth, or at least a version of it. "I was betrayed," he said, the words grinding out of him like gravel. "The people I worked with, the family I belonged to. Someone decided I was in the way. They tried to remove me. That night on your porch, that wasn't an accident. It was an execution that failed." Ella stared at him, her blood running cold. "So you are hiding from them?" "I was," Nico corrected, his eyes darkening. "Now I am hunting them. I went out today to find out who gave the order, to find out why." "And did you?" "I found enough," he said. "I found out that I am supposed to be dead, and as long as I am dead, I have the element of surprise, but it means I have to move carefully." He didn't tell her the rest. He didn't tell her that he had tracked down a low-level associate in a warehouse district and beaten the man until he gave up a name. He didn't tell her that the betrayal went deeper than he had imagined, cutting straight to the heart of the Moretti organization. "You should leave," Ella whispered, the reality of his words sinking in. "If they find you here—" "They won't," Nico vowed, stepping closer, his intensity burning. "I made sure of it. No one followed me. I am a ghost. Ella, and ghosts don't leave trails." But ghosts were not the only things haunting Red Harbor. The next day, the atmosphere in the city shifted. It was subtle. A tension in the air that pricked at the back of Ella's neck. At the cafe, she felt watched. Every time the door chimed, she looked up, expecting to see men with guns. It was late afternoon when she noticed him. He was sitting in a booth near the window, nursing a black coffee that had gone cold an hour ago. He was wearing a leather jacket that looked too expensive for the neighborhood, and his eyes kept flicking toward her every time she moved behind the counter. He wasn't eating. He wasn't on his phone. He was just watching. Ella tried to ignore him, focusing on wiping down the espresso machine. But when her shift ended and she walked out into the cool evening air, he was there. She walked briskly toward her car, clutching her purse tight against her side. The sound of heavy boots on the pavement echoed behind her. She sped up. The footsteps sped up. Panic flared in her chest. She fumbled for her keys, her fingers trembling. The man was gaining on her. She could hear his breathing now, rough and close. "Miss Donovan," a voice called out. It was oily, smooth with a false politeness. Ella spun around, her back pressing against the driver's side door of her car. The man had stopped 10 feet away. He was smiling, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Can I help you?" she asked, her voice high and tight. "Just wanted to ask a few questions," the man said, taking a step forward. "About a friend of yours. Big guy, dark hair. Goes by Nick, maybe?" Ella's heart hammered against her ribs. This was it. The Dorsas. "I don't know anyone named Nick." She lied, gripping her keys like a weapon. "Leave me alone." Now, the man tutted, taking another step. "Don't be like that. We just want to help him. He's in a lot of trouble. If you tell us where he is—" He never finished the sentence. A shadow detached itself from the alleyway adjacent to the parking lot. It moved with terrifying speed, a blur of motion that the eye could barely track. Nico collided with the man, tackling him onto the wet asphalt with a bone-jarring thud. Ella screamed, pressing herself against the car. Nico didn't give the man a chance to recover. He hauled him up by the collar of his jacket and slammed him against the brick wall of the alley, his forearm crushing the man's windpipe. "You are looking for me," Nico snarled, his voice unrecognizable, a low, demonic growl. The man clawed at Nico's arm, his face turning purple, his eyes bulging with terror. He tried to speak, but only a choked gurgle came out. Nico leaned in close, his face inches from the man's. "You go back to Rico. You tell him the dead don't stay dead, and you tell him that if anyone comes near her again, I will peel the skin from your bones slowly. Do you understand?" He released the pressure just enough for the man to nod frantically. "Go!" Nico commanded, shoving him away. The man didn't wait. He scrambled to his feet, stumbling and falling, then sprinting away into the darkness, leaving his dignity and his mission behind in the puddle-strewn alley. Nico stood there for a moment, his chest heaving, his hands clenched into fists at his sides. He took a deep breath, composing himself, trying to shove the monster back into its cage before he turned around. When he did, he found Ella staring at him. She wasn't screaming anymore. She was pale, shaking, her eyes wide with a dawn of horrified realization. "Get in the car," Nico said, his voice flat. Ella stammered. "Get in the car, Ella, now." The drive home was silent. The tension inside the vehicle was so thick it felt suffocating. Ella drove with white-knuckled grip, her eyes fixed on the road, while Nico watched the mirrors, scanning for any sign that the man had doubled back. When they got inside the house, Ella dropped her purse on the floor and turned on him. The fear had burned off, leaving behind a raw, desperate need for the truth. "Who are you?" she asked. Her voice was quiet, but it carried the weight of a shout. Nico locked the door and engaged the deadbolt. He kept his back to her for a long moment. I told you, I am— Don't lie to me, Ella cried out, her voice breaking. I just watched you almost kill a man with your bare hands. Nick, that wasn't self-defense. That was professional. That was muscle memory. She walked around him, forcing him to look at her. I know you are not who you say you are. I know Nick isn't your name. I know those men are looking for you, but I am the one they cornered in the parking lot. I am the one they are following. I need the truth. Nico looked down at her. She was trembling, her eyes bright with unshed tears. She looked fragile, yet she was standing up to a man she had just seen inflict brutal violence. You are right, he said softly. Nick isn't my name. Then tell me, she pleaded. Tell me everything. I can't. Why? Because you are safer not knowing, he said, the words tasting like ash in his mouth. The name I carry, it is a death sentence. Ella, if you know it, if you say it, you become a part of a world you cannot survive. I am trying to keep you out of it. Keep me out of it? Ella let out a bitter, incredulous laugh. I am in it. They followed me home. I am lying to the police. I am hiding a fugitive, and I am being stalked by gangsters. I am already in it. Nick, I am just the only one who doesn't know the rules of the game. She stepped closer, poking him in the chest. I don't want to be protected like some pawn. I don't want to be kept in the dark while you play God with my safety. This is my life. This is my house. I have a right to know what I am risking it for. Nico caught her hand, holding it against his chest. He could feel her pulse hammering against his palm. You aren't a pawn, he said intensely. You are the only innocent thing I have ever known. He looked at her, his defenses crumbling under the weight of her gaze. He was tired of lying. He was tired of being the monster. That night, he whispered, his voice dropping to a rough timbre. When I was bleeding out on your porch, I was ready to die. I had accepted it. But then you opened the door. You didn't ask for money. You didn't ask for favors. You just helped. You are the only thing that kept me human. Ella, if I tell you who I am, I'm afraid you will look at me and see the monster everyone else sees. And I can't. I can't handle that. Ella searched his face. She saw the fear in his eyes, not fear of death, but fear of rejection. Fear of losing the fragile connection they had built in the quiet of this house. Try me, she whispered. Nico looked at her lips. The restraint he had been exercising for weeks snapped. The logic, the safety, the rules, they all incinerated in the heat of the moment. He didn't speak. He just leaned down and crushed his mouth to hers. This time, there was no hesitation. There was no pulling back. It was a collision. Ella made a small sound in her throat and threw her arms around his neck, pulling him closer. She kissed him with all the fear and frustration and desire that had been building up inside her. He swept her up into his arms, her legs instinctively wrapping around his waist, and carried her up the stairs. He didn't break the kiss, not even when he kicked the bedroom door open. He lowered her onto the bed, the old springs creaking under their weight. The room was dark, lit only by the streetlight filtering through the sheer curtains. Nico hovered over her, bracing his weight on his forearms. He looked down at her as if she were something sacred, something he wasn't sure he was allowed to touch. Ella, he breathed. His voice wrecked. She reached up, her hands trembling as she found the hem of his shirt. Don't talk. Just be here. She pulled the shirt over his head, tossing it onto the floor. His skin was hot, fever hot. She ran her hands over his chest, tracing the hard lines of muscle, the ridges of the scars. She touched the bullet wound on his shoulder, her fingers ghosting over the violent history written on his body. Nico shuddered at her touch. He had been touched by many people in his life, in anger, in violence, in transactional lust, but never like this, never with reverence. He lowered himself, kissing the hollow of her throat, her collarbone. His hands were large and rough, but they moved over her with agonizing slowness. He unbuttoned her blouse, his fingers brushing against her skin, leaving trails of fire. When they finally came together, skin against skin. It was an exorcism. It was desperate and raw. Ella clung to him, her nails digging into his shoulders, anchoring him to the earth. Nico held her as if she were a lifeline in a hurricane, burying his face in the crook of her neck, inhaling her scent. It wasn't just physical. It was an emotional reckoning. Every touch was a confession he couldn't speak. I am yours. I am lost. Keep me. The room was filled with the sounds of their breathing, the rustle of sheets, the whispered names. The storm outside the house seemed insignificant compared to the storm inside the room. For a suspended span of time, there was no mafia, no Dorsas, no past, and no future. There were only the two of them, tangled together in the dark, trying to fuse their broken pieces into something whole. Afterward, the silence returned, but it was heavy and sweet now. They lay tangled in the sheets, limbs intertwined. Ella's head was resting on Nico's chest, rising and falling with his steady breathing. She traced the line of the lion tattoo on his back with one finger. The reality of what they had done and what it meant began to settle in. She wasn't just sheltering a stranger anymore. She had given herself to him, and he had taken her, claiming a part of her soul that she could never get back. "Nick," she whispered into the darkness. He tightened his arm around her, pulling her closer against his side. "Yeah? What happens now?" she asked. "What happens when they find you? Because they will. That man in the parking lot. He won't stop." Nico was silent for a long time. He stared up at the ceiling, his mind already shifting gears, calculating, strategizing. The brief respite was over. The war was at the door. He pressed a kiss to the top of her head. His voice, when he spoke, was no longer the voice of the man who fixed her sink or cooked her pasta. It was the voice of the underboss. It was cold, absolute, and terrifyingly certain. "Let them come," he said. Ella lifted her head, looking at him. His profile was cut from stone in the shadows. "What do you mean?" Nico turned his head to look at her. His eyes burned with a dark, possessive fire. "When the world finds me again," he said, his voice a low rumble that vibrated against her chest. "I won't run. I am done running. If they want to come for me, let them. If they try to touch you, if they try to take this away from me." He paused, his hand coming up to cup her cheek, his thumb brushing over her lip. "Then I will burn the world to protect you," he vowed. "I will burn it all down to ash." Ella shivered, not from cold, but from the intensity of his promise. It was a promise of violence, but it was also the most romantic thing anyone had ever said to her. She laid her head back down on his chest, listening to the steady, powerful beat of his heart, and closed her eyes. She knew he meant it, and God help her, she felt safe. The secret that Nico Moretti was alive did not stay buried. It leaked out of the alleyways of Red Harbor like sewage seeping through cracked pavement. It started as a whisper in the underground gambling dens and the dockside bars, a rumor that the ghost of the Moretti family had risen from the grave. Then it became a shout. The Dorsa gang, terrified by the sudden reappearance of a man they had toasted to being dead, went on the offensive. They stopped looking for shadows and started breaking fingers. A busboy from the Rusty Spoon, a teenager named Tommy, who knew nothing more than how to scrape gum off tables, was snatched off the street while walking home. He was returned 2 days later, beaten and terrified, with a message carved into the cast on his broken arm. "Where is he?" Ella felt the noose tightening. Every time a car drove slowly past her house, her heart hammered a frantic rhythm against her ribs. But Nico was calm. It was a terrifying, glacial calmness that was far worse than his anger. He spent his days pacing the living room, his phone glued to his ear, speaking in rapid-fire Italian or coded English, moving pieces on a chessboard only he could see. On a Tuesday afternoon, the war came to her doorstep. Ella had left work early, a migraine pounding behind her eyes from the stress. When she pulled into her driveway, she saw it immediately. The front door, the one Nico had so carefully repaired, was hanging off its hinges. The wood around the lock was splintered, jagged shards of white paint scattered across the porch like teeth. "No," she whispered, killing the engine. She didn't go inside. She grabbed her phone to call Nico, but before she could dial, the back door of the house burst open. Two men in dark jackets stumbled out, carrying her television and a box of her jewelry. And then, a blur of motion erupted from the side of the garage. Nico had been home. He had been waiting. Ella watched through her windshield, hand clamped over her mouth, as Nico descended on them. He didn't fight like a brawler. He fought like a machine designed for dismantling human beings. He caught the first man by the throat, driving him backward into the siding of the house with a force that shook the frame. The second man dropped the television and pulled a knife, but Nico didn't even flinch. He sidestepped the thrust, grabbed the man's wrist, and twisted. The snap of bone was audible even through the glass of the car. The man screamed and dropped to his knees. Nico kicked him in the chest, sending him sprawling into the mud. The first man tried to run, but Nico was on him instantly, dragging him by the hair toward the open door of the garage. Ella scrambled out of the car. "Nick, stop!" He didn't hear her, or he didn't care. He dragged the man into the dark garage and slammed the heavy metal door shut. The lock clicked. Ella ran to the garage door, pounding on it. "Nick, let him go! You can't do this here!" There was no answer. Only the sound of a heavy thud, a muffled cry of pain, and then a low, terrifyingly steady voice speaking. She backed away, her stomach churning. She ran into the house. The living room was trashed. Her grandmother's vase lay in pieces on the floor. Her books were torn from the shelves. It was a violation, a desecration of the one place she had fought so hard to keep safe. But the mess didn't scare her as much as what was happening in the garage. 20 minutes later, the side door opened. Nico walked into the kitchen. He stopped at the sink and turned on the faucet. He began scrubbing his hands with dish soap. There was blood on his knuckles, but his shirt was clean. His face was a mask of indifference. Ella stood in the doorway, shaking. "What did you do?" Nico didn't look at her. He turned off the water and dried his hands on a towel. I asked him a question. He answered. Then I told him to leave and told his boss that this house is off limits. "You heard him," Ella said, her voice trembling. Nico turned slowly. His eyes were empty voids, devoid of the warmth she had seen the night they made love. "He kicked down your door. Ella, he touched your things. He would have hurt you if you were home." "Yes, I heard him. I would do it again." "You enjoyed it," she accused, backing away as he took a step toward her. Nico stopped. A flicker of pain crossed his face, cracking the mask. "I did what was necessary. That is not the same thing." "I saw you," she whispered, tears pricking her eyes. "I saw how you looked. You looked dead, cold. I don't know who that person is." "That person is the reason you are still breathing," Nico said harshly. "Do not look at me like I'm a monster for protecting you. I'm looking at you like a stranger," Ella shot back, "because that is what you are. I slept with a stranger." She turned and ran up the stairs, slamming her bedroom door and locking it. For the next 2 days, they lived as ghosts in the same house. Ella slept in her room with a chair wedged under the handle. Nico slept on the couch downstairs, a gun on the coffee table. The air was thick with unsaid words and a terrified tension. Ella pulled away. She stopped cooking for him. She avoided eye contact. When they were in the same room, she treated him with a polite, fragile distance that cut Nico deeper than any knife. He watched her with a desperate hunger, seeing the woman who had saved him slipping through his fingers because of the violence he couldn't escape. One evening, he cornered her in the hallway. He didn't touch her, but he blocked her path to the stairs. "Stop running from me," he said, his voice rough. "I am not running," Ella said, clutching her laundry basket like a shield. "I'm just tired." "You're afraid of me," Nico corrected. "I see it in your eyes. You look at me and you see the blood." "Can you blame me?" Ella asked softly. "You turned my garage into a torture chamber. Nick." "I did it for you," Nico roared, the controls snapping. He slammed his hand against the wall next to her head, making her jump. He immediately pulled back, looking horrified at his own aggression. "I'm sorry," he whispered, lowering his hand. "I am sorry, but you have to understand, these men, they don't stop because you ask them nicely. They stop when they are too broken to crawl. I promised you that you would never be touched. I meant it, even if it costs me my soul. Ella, I won't let them put a hand on you. And what about you? Ella asked, tears spilling over. Who protects me from you? From this darkness? Nico looked at her, his expression shattering. I do. I stay away. I won't touch you. I won't come near you. Just don't throw me out. Not yet. It isn't safe. The pressure came from all sides. 2 days later, the Rusty Spoon was invaded not by gangsters, but by suits. 2 men walked in during the breakfast rush. They wore crisp navy suits, earpieces, and expressions of professional boredom. They flashed badges at the manager and then made a beeline for Ella. Miss Donovan? The taller one asked. Special Agent Miller, FBI. We need a moment of your time. Ella's hands shook as she wiped them on her apron. She led them to a booth in the back, conscious of the eyes of the customers and the whispers of the staff. Agent Miller placed a photograph on the table. It was a surveillance shot, grainy but clear. It showed a man in a tuxedo, entering a nightclub. He looked younger, cleaner, and infinitely more dangerous. But it was him. It was Nico. Have you seen this man? Miller asked. Ella stared at the photo. In the picture, Nico looked like a king. In her mind, she saw him bleeding on her porch, saw him fixing her door, saw him kneeling in the dark, holding her hand. No, she lied. The word tasted like metal. I've never seen him. Who is he? His name is Nico Moretti, the agent said, watching her pupils. He's a high-ranking member of organized crime. He's wanted for racketeering, murder, and conspiracy. We have intel suggesting he was wounded and went to ground in this area. I just serve coffee, Ella said, forcing her voice to remain steady. I don't pay attention to faces. Miss Donovan. The second agent leaned in, his voice dropping to a threatening murmur. Harboring a fugitive is a federal offense. It carries a sentence of up to 10 years. If you are helping him, tell us now. We can protect you. If he is in your house, you are in grave danger. Men like Moretti don't have friends. They have collateral. I told you, Ella said, standing up, her legs feeling like water. I haven't seen him. Now, if you will excuse me, I have customers. She walked away, feeling their eyes boring into her back. She went to the bathroom and vomited into the sink. That night, Ella drove home in a haze of panic. The FBI knew. The Dorsas knew. The circle had closed until it was a noose around her neck. She burst into the house. Nico was in the kitchen, cleaning his gun. He looked up as she entered, sensing her panic immediately. What happened? He asked, standing up. The FBI came to the diner, Ella choked out, throwing her purse on the table. They showed me your picture. They told me your name. Nico went still. They said you are Nico Moretti, she continued, her voice rising to a hysterical pitch. They said you are a murderer. They said I am going to prison for 10 years if I don't give you up. She grabbed his arm, digging her fingers into his bicep. You have to leave. You have to go. Tonight. Now. Before they come here with a warrant. Before the Dorsas burn the house down with us inside. I can't do this anymore. Nick, I can't. Nico looked at her. He saw the terror etched into her features. He saw the toll his presence had taken on her. She was right. He had stayed too long. He had been selfish, drinking in her light while his darkness poisoned her life. Okay, he said quietly. Ella stopped, stunned by his sudden capitulation. Okay, Nico repeated. I will go. He placed the gun on the table. Then, he took a step back, putting space between them. But you deserve the truth before I leave, he said. The whole truth. He stood tall, his shoulders squaring, shedding the last remnants of the injured stray she had taken in. He looked like the man in the FBI photo now, powerful, imposing, regal. My name is Nico Moretti. I am the underboss of the Moretti crime family. I ran the entire Eastern Seaboard operation. I had money, power, and soldiers who would die for me. He took a breath. The man who betrayed me was my cousin, Sal. He wanted my seat. He paid off my bodyguards. They cornered me in a parking garage 3 weeks ago. They put 2 bullets in me and left me for dead. I crawled out. I stole a car. I drove until the gas ran out, and then I walked until I collapsed on your porch." He looked at her, his dark eyes shimmering with an intensity that stole her breath. The FBI agent was right about one thing. I am a dangerous man. I have done terrible things, but he was wrong about the collateral. Slowly, deliberately, Nico Moretti sank to his knees. It was a shocking gesture. A man of his stature, a man who commanded armies, kneeling on the linoleum floor of a rundown kitchen in front of a waitress. He looked up at her, his expression raw, stripped of all armor. "I never intended to survive that night," he confessed. "I was ready to fade out, but then you opened the door, and you gave me a blanket, and you fed me. You didn't know who I was, and you treated me like a human being. You became the only thing in this world that made sense to me." He reached out, taking her hand. His fingers were warm, calloused, and trembling slightly. "I will leave," he vowed. "If that is what you want, if you want to be safe, if you want your life back, say the word, and I will walk out that door and you will never see me again. I will surrender to the FBI or I will go to war with Sal, but I will be out of your life." He squeezed her hand. "Tell me, Ella, do you want me gone now that you know what I am?" Ella looked down at him. She looked at the man who had cooked her dinner, who had fixed her door, who had beaten a man for touching her, who had held her through the storm. She looked at the monster the world feared, and she saw only the man who loved her. The fear was still there. It was a cold stone in her gut. But as she looked into his eyes, she realized that the thought of the empty house, the silence, the life without him, was infinitely colder. Tears spilled down her cheeks. She dropped to her knees in front of him, bringing herself to his level. She reached out and touched his jaw, her thumb tracing the bruise there. "You scare me," she whispered, her voice breaking. "You are everything I should run away from. God, Nick, you scare me." Nico closed his eyes, turning his face into her palm, accepting the rejection he thought was coming. "But," Ella sobbed, pulling his face back to hers, "losing you scares me more." Nico's eyes snapped open. A sound tore from his throat, half a groan, half a sob. He didn't wait. He surged forward, wrapping his arms around her, pulling her body against his so tightly it knocked the wind out of her. He buried his face in her neck, inhaling sharply. "Ella," he groaned. "Ella." She clung to him, her fingers gripping his shirt, her tears soaking the fabric. "Don't leave. Don't you dare leave." "Never," he swore against her skin. "I will never leave you." He captured her lips in a kiss that was nothing like the first. This wasn't slow or sensual. It was urgent. It was frantic. It was the kiss of two people standing on the edge of a cliff, deciding to jump together. They moved without standing up, a tangle of limbs and desperate hands. Nico pulled her into his lap, his hands roaming over her back, her hips, needing to reassure himself that she was real, that she was his. Ella kissed him back with a ferocity that matched his own, her hands tangling in his hair, pulling him closer. "Make me forget," she whispered against his mouth. "Make me forget them." "I will," Nico growled. He lifted her then, standing up with her legs wrapped around his waist, and carried her to the living room couch. There was no time for the bedroom. The need was too immediate. Clothes were discarded in a frenzy. When his skin met hers, it was like striking a match. The passion was raw, bordering on rough, fueled by the adrenaline of the threat outside and the revelation between them. Nico worshipped her body, his hands marking every inch of her skin, his mouth murmuring Italian endearments against her throat. "Mia," he whispered, over and over. "Mine." Ella arched into him, the world narrowing down to the friction of skin, the heat of his breath, the weight of his body pressing her into the cushions. She ran her hands over the lion tattoo on his back, her nails digging into the ink, claiming the beast as her own. He took her with a desperation that shook them both. It was a reclaiming of life in the face of death. Every movement was a promise, every touch a vow. "I am here. I am alive. You are mine." When it was over, the room was quiet again, save for the sound of their harsh breathing. They lay tangled on the narrow couch, Nico's coat thrown over them as a blanket. Ella rested her head on his shoulder, listening to his heart rate slow. She felt exhausted, drained, but for the first time in days, she didn't feel afraid. She felt anchored. "We can't stay here," Nico said into the silence, his voice low and steady. He was already planning again. The lover was receding, the boss returning. "I know," Ella whispered. "I have a safe house," he said. "Outside the city, heavily fortified. My men are already moving into position." He kissed her forehead. "Tomorrow, we go to war, Ella. But tonight you sleep in my arms. Promise?" she asked, closing her eyes. "I promise," Nico said. "I'm not going anywhere." The house on Elm Street was no longer a home. It was a bunker. In the span of 24 hours, the quiet decay of Ella's Victorian inheritance had been replaced by the silent, lethal efficiency of a military operation. Black SUVs idled in the driveway. Men with earpieces and bulges under their tailored jackets patrolled the perimeter of the yard, their eyes scanning the tree line for movement. The windows were covered with heavy blackout curtains, plunging the interior into a perpetual twilight. Ella moved through the hallway like a ghost in her own life. She carried a tray of coffee. Stepping over a duffel bag filled with ammunition that sat near the front door, the air smelled of gun oil and stale tobacco. She found Nico in the dining room. The table, where they had once shared pasta and tentative glances, was now buried under blueprints of the city, printed surveillance photos, and several disposable cell phones. Nico stood at the head of the table, flanked by two of his lieutenants, men named Luca and Marco, who looked at Ella with polite deference, but zero warmth. Nico looked up as she entered. The exhaustion under his eyes was profound, bruised purple against his olive skin, but his energy was manic. He was a coiled spring. "Put that down," he said to her, his voice tight. He gestured to the coffee. "You should be upstairs. It is safer in the bedroom." "I am not a prisoner, Nick," Ella said softly. Setting the tray down, she still called him Nick. It felt like the only tether to the man who had fixed her door. Rather than this warlord standing before her, "You are a target," he corrected. He walked over to her, his hand gripping her hip, pulling her out of earshot of the other men. His touch was possessive, heavy. "We are close. We've located 2 of Dorsa's safe houses. Tonight, we strike. We cut off the head of the snake, and this ends." "And then what?" Ella asked, searching his face. "Do the men with guns just leave? Does my life go back to normal?" Nico didn't answer. He leaned down and kissed her forehead, a brief, hard press of his lips. "Go upstairs. Mia cara, please." Ella went, but the weight of his world was pressing down on her chest, making it hard to breathe. She loved him. She knew that now with a terrifying certainty, but she was drowning in his reality. An hour later, her cell phone buzzed. It wasn't a number she recognized. She picked it up. "Hello?" "Ella." The voice was trembling, choked with tears. Ella gripped the phone. "Laura? Laura, is that you?" "Ella, please," Laura Price sobbed. "They have me. They came to the clinic. Oh, God, they hurt me." The blood drained from Ella's face. Who? Who has you?" The phone was snatched away on the other end. A rough, sneering voice replaced Laura's. "Hello? Miss Donovan, you have been a hard woman to reach." It was Rico Dorsa. Ella knew the name from the whispers of Nico's men. "Let her go," Ella whispered, her hand shaking so hard she nearly dropped the device. "She has nothing to do with this. She's just a doctor." "She patched him up," Rico spat. She picked a side. "Now, listen closely. We know Moretti is dug in tight. We can't get to him without a war that brings the feds down on all of us. So, we are going to trade." "Trade?" "You for the doctor," Rico said. "Simple economics. You come to us, and doctor. Price walks free. If you don't, well." I started removing parts of her anatomy, starting with the fingers she uses to hold a scalpel. A scream echoed in the background. Laura's scream. It tore through Ella's heart like a jagged piece of glass. "Stop!" Ella cried into the phone. "Stop it! I'll do it! I'll come!" "Good girl," Rico purred. "You have 1 hour. Come to the old textile factory on the waterfront. Come alone. If we see one Moretti soldier, nay, the doctor dies." The line went dead. Ella stood in the middle of her bedroom, the silence ringing in her ears. She couldn't tell Nico. If she told him, he would storm the place. There would be a firefight, and in the chaos, Laura would be killed. Nico would sacrifice Laura to save Ella. She knew that as surely as she knew the sun would rise. He would burn the world for her, and he wouldn't care who turned to ash in the process. She couldn't let that happen. She wiped her eyes, steeled her spine, and walked downstairs. Nico was still arguing over the maps. He didn't look up. "I need to go to the pharmacy," Ella announced. Her voice was frighteningly steady. Nico's head snapped up. "No, I have a migraine," she lied, rubbing her temples. "I need my prescription. It is at the drive-through pharmacy 3 blocks away. I can't sleep. Nick, I need it." Nico studied her. He saw the pale skin, the tension. He interpreted it as fear of the situation, not deception. He nodded to Marco. "Take her," Nico ordered. "Do not stop the car. Drive through only, eyes open." "Yes, boss." The ride was short. As Marco pulled the black SUV up to the pharmacy window, Ella's heart was hammering a hole in her chest. "I need to sign for it," she said. "Their machine is broken. I have to go in." "I'll come in with you," Marco said, unbuckling his seatbelt. "No," Ella said sharply, then softer. "Please, it's feminine products too. I don't want a bodyguard hovering over me while I buy tampons. It will be 5 minutes. You can watch the door from here." Marco hesitated, then sighed. 5 minutes. I am watching the door." Ella walked into the pharmacy. She felt Marco's eyes on her back. She walked straight down the aisle, past the shampoo, past the candy, and out the emergency fire exit at the back of the store. A gray van was waiting in the alley. The side door slid open. Ella didn't run. She walked toward it, surrendering herself to the dark. 20 minutes later, Marco returned to the house alone. His face was the color of paper. Nico was cleaning a pistol in the living room. When he saw Marco enter without Ella, he didn't ask what happened. He stood up, and the chair he had been sitting on fell backward with a crash. "Where is she?" Nico's voice was a quiet, vibrating frequency of violence. She went out the back," Marco stammered, trembling. "I watched the front. She didn't come out. I went in. The fire exit was triggered. She is gone. Boss." Nico didn't yell. He didn't strike Marco. He went completely, terrifyingly still. The humanity that Ella had nurtured in him, the softness she had coaxed to the surface, evaporated instantly. What remained was the monster. He walked to the table and picked up his phone. It was ringing. He answered it. "We have her," Rico Dorsa said. "The doctor is in a cab on her way home. Fair trade." "If you touch her," Nico whispered, and the sound was so demonic that even his own men took a step back. "I will not just kill you. Rico, I will dismantle you. I will make you beg for death for 3 days before I grant it." "Come and get her," Rico laughed. "Textile factory." "Bring your boys. Let's finish this." Nico hung up. He looked at Luca. "Get everyone," Nico commanded. "Everyone, so we are not going to strike. We are going to scorch the earth." The textile factory was a cavernous, rotting skeleton of industry. Rain leaked through the shattered skylights, pooling on the concrete floor. Ella was on her knees in the center of the vast room. Her hands were zip-tied behind her back. Her cheek was stinging where one of the guards had struck her for struggling. Rico Dorsa paced in front of her. He was a short, wiry man with a scar running through his eyebrow and a cheap suit that smelled of cigars. "You are pretty," Rico sneered, crouching down to look her in the eye. He reached out, trailing a finger down her jaw. "I see why he kept you. A nice little pet to keep the bed warm." Ella flinched away from his touch, her eyes blazing. She was terrified. Her body was shaking uncontrollably, but beneath the fear was a core of cold anger she had learned from Nico. "He isn't going to bargain with you," Ella said, her voice raspy. "You think you have leverage? You just signed your own death warrant." Rico laughed, standing up and spreading his arms. He had 20 men in the rafters, armed with automatic rifles. "I have an army. Sweetheart, Moretti is walking into a meat grinder." "He doesn't care about your army," Ella said. She looked at the dark corners of the warehouse. She could feel him. It was a strange sensation, a magnetic pull. He was close. He's going to kill all of you. Rico's smile faltered. He grabbed a handful of her hair, yanking her head back. You think he loves you? Men like us don't love. We possess. You are just property he lost. And once I put a bullet in his head, maybe I will keep you for myself. Ella looked up at him, ignoring the pain in her scalp. She remembered Nico's words. I will burn the world. You don't scare me, she whispered, staring into Rico's eyes. Rico scoffed. No, no, Ella said. A shadow detached itself from the darkness of the catwalk above them. But he will. Rico frowned, confusingly crowding his face. What? The lights in the warehouse exploded. Simultaneously, the skylights shattered inward as three figures rappelled down on lines. Flashbang grenades hit the floor with deafening cracks, blinding white light searing the darkness. Chaos erupted, and gunfire stuttered from the rafters, but it was met with precise, lethal return fire from the shadows. Nico's men had not just walked in the front door, they had infiltrated the perimeter while Rico was busy gloating. Ella curled into a ball on the floor, squeezing her eyes shut as bullets chewed up the concrete around her. The noise was deafening, a cacophony of screams, explosions, and the mechanical rattle of automatic weapons. Then, silence fell near her. A heavy, terrifying silence in the eye of the storm. She opened her eyes. Rico was standing 5 feet away, holding a pistol, searching frantically for a target in the smoke. Rico! The voice was a roar. Rico spun around. Nico Moretti walked out of the smoke. He wasn't taking cover. He wasn't hiding. He walked with a relentless, predatory gait, a gun in each hand. He looked like a demon rising from hell, his black coat billowing, his face streaked with soot and blood that wasn't his. Rico raised his gun, his hand shaking. Stay back! Nico didn't stop. He fired once with his left hand. The bullet took Rico in the shoulder, spinning him around. Rico screamed and dropped his gun. Clutching the wound, he fell to his knees, right next to Ella. Nico closed the distance. He stopped directly in front of them. He didn't look at the chaos dying down around them. He looked only at Rico. I told you, Nico said, his voice devoid of all emotion. I told you what I would do. Wait, Rico gasped, holding up a bloody hand. Nico, wait, we can talk. Territory. Money. Nico holstered his left gun. He stepped forward, grabbed Rico by the throat, and lifted him off his knees. He shoved the barrel of his right gun under Rico's chin. She is not property, Nico snarled. He pulled the trigger. The sound was final. Rico dropped to the floor, a crumpled heap of expensive fabric and wasted ambition. Nico stood over the body for a second, his chest heaving. Then, the rage seemed to drain out of him, leaving only frantic desperation. He dropped the gun. He fell to his knees beside Ella. Ella, he choked out. He pulled a knife from his boot and sliced the zip ties binding her wrists. As soon as her hands were free, she threw herself at him. Nico caught her, burying his face in her neck. He was shaking. The man who had just executed a rival gang leader with surgical precision was trembling so hard his teeth chattered. I thought I lost you, he whispered, his voice broken, wet with tears. I thought I was too late. He pulled back, his hands running over her face, her arms checking for injuries. His hands were covered in blood, smearing red across her cheeks, but Ella didn't care. She grabbed his wrists, halting his frantic search. I'm okay, she sobbed. I'm okay, Laura. Is she safe? She is safe, Nico promised. My men found her. She is safe. He pulled her into his chest again, rocking her back and forth. The warehouse smelled of cordite and death, but in the circle of his arms, Ella felt the only safety she had ever known. Don't ever do that again, Nico rasped, his grip tightening until it was almost painful. You can't leave me. You can't ever leave me again. I won't survive it. Ella, I will tear the whole world apart. Ella pulled back just enough to look him in the eyes. They were wild, dilated, terrified. She saw the depth of his obsession, the dangerous, all-consuming nature of his love. It was heavy. Yes, it was dark, but it was hers. She reached up, wiping a smear of blood from his cheek with her thumb. "Then don't ever make me feel like I have to," she whispered. Nico stared at her, the words sinking in. He closed his eyes and pressed his forehead against hers. "Surrendering. Never," he vowed. "Let's go home." He stood up, lifting her into his arms as if she weighed nothing. He carried her past the bodies, past the wreckage, and out into the cool night air where the rain had finally stopped. He didn't look back. He never looked back. The return of Nico Moretti to the throne of Red Harbor was not marked by a parade, but by a silence that fell over the city like a heavy winter blanket. The chaos that had erupted in the wake of his disappearance vanished overnight. The street corners where dealers had pushed their luck were suddenly empty. The rival lieutenants who had whispered about seizing power packed their bags and left the state, or they simply disappeared, never to be heard from again. Order had been restored. The lion had returned to the pride, and the jungle was quiet. For Ella, the transition was jarring. She was whisked away from the hospital where she had been treated for minor cuts and bruises, bypassed her old life entirely, and driven up the winding coastal roads to the cliffs overlooking the city. The car stopped in front of a sprawling estate hidden behind iron gates and high stone walls. It was a masterpiece of modern architecture, glass, steel, and white stone that gleamed under the moonlight. It was beautiful, cold and impenetrable. "This is home," Nico said, opening the car door for her. Ella looked at the mansion, then back at him. He was dressed in a suit again. The blood and grime of the warehouse washed away, replaced by the impeccable armor of the dawn. But his eyes were the same. They watched her with that intense, unwavering focus that made her skin prickle. "It looks like a museum," Ella murmured. "It is a fortress," Nico corrected. He took her hand, interlacing their fingers. "You will never be unsafe here." Life in the mansion was a strange dream. Ella had staff now, people who cooked, cleaned, and addressed her as ma'am. Her wardrobe was filled with silk and cashmere, replaced by efficient assistants who seemed to know her size before she did. But beneath the luxury, Ella felt a restlessness growing in her bones. She was a survivor. She was used to double shifts and balancing checkbooks. Being a bird in a gilded cage, no matter how much the owner loved her, was suffocating. 3 weeks after the warehouse incident, the tension finally snapped. Nico came home late to find Ella dressed in her old waitress uniform, tying her apron in the kitchen. The staff had been dismissed for the night. He stopped in the doorway, loosening his tie. His expression darkened instantly. "Take that off," he said quietly. Ella didn't flinch. She finished tying the knot and turned to face him. "No, I'm going to work tomorrow. The cafe is reopening. Mr. Camden is still in the hospital, but the manager needs help." "You are not going back there," Nico said, walking into the room. The air pressure seemed to drop. "You don't need to work. I have transferred $5 million into an account in your name. You can buy the cafe. You can burn it down, but you are not waiting tables." "I like waiting tables," Ella argued, her voice rising. "I like having a purpose. I like knowing that the money in my pocket is money I earned. I am not your pet. Nico, I am not some fragile thing you put on a shelf to admire." "It is not about money," Nico growled, closing the distance between them. "It is about safety. Everyone knows who you are now. You are a target." "Then put guards on me," Ella shouted. She stepped forward, closing the gap herself, pushing him backward. Nico looked surprised. No one pushed him. "You promised me," she said, poking a finger into his chest, pushing him back until he hit the wall. "You said I wouldn't have to change who I am. Well, this is who I am. I am Ella Donovan. I serve coffee. I talk to locals. I live in the real world. If you try to lock me up in this tower, I will hate you for it. Do you understand? I will hate you." Nico stared down at her. Her eyes were blazing with defiance, her chest heaving. She looked magnificent. The fear that had haunted her for weeks was gone, replaced by the same fire that had made her open the door to a bleeding stranger in a storm. He didn't argue. He reached out, grabbing her by the waist, and lifted her effortlessly off the floor. Ella gasped as he sat her onto the marble counter, stepping between her legs. "You could never hate me," he whispered, his voice rough with desire. "You are too much like me." "Try me," she breathed. He kissed her. It wasn't a gentle kiss. It was a claim. He devoured her protest, his mouth moving over hers with a hunger that bordered on desperation. Ella wrapped her arms around his neck, pulling him closer, her fingers tangling in his hair. The argument dissolved into heat. He broke the kiss, resting his forehead against hers, both of them breathing heavily. "Fine," he conceded, his voice hoarse. "You work, but my men are inside. My men are outside, and I pick you up every night." Ella smiled, tracing the line of his jaw. "Deal." The peace was fragile. However, while the criminal underworld bowed to Nico, the legal world was less forgiving. A week later, the FBI returned. Ella was at the mansion, reading in the sunroom, when the gates buzzed. Special Agent Miller was back, and this time, he had a warrant. Nico was in a meeting in his study. When the security team alerted him, he stormed out, buttoning his jacket, his face a mask of lethal intent. He met Ella in the foyer just as the agents were being escorted in. "Miss Donovan," Miller said, his face smug, "we have a warrant for your arrest, aiding and abetting a fugitive, obstruction of justice, accessories to racketeering." Nico stepped in front of her, a human wall. His hand drifted toward the inside of his jacket. The security team behind him tensed, their hands hovering over their weapons. "If you try to put cuffs on her," Nico said, his voice terrifyingly calm, "you will not walk out of this house," Miller sneered. "Is that a threat? Moretti? In front of federal agents?" "It is a fact," Nico replied. Ella saw the situation spiraling. She saw the violence in Nico's eyes, the readiness to slaughter federal agents to keep her from spending a night in a cell. It would be a massacre, and it would end with Nico dead or in prison forever. She stepped out from behind him. She placed a hand on his chest, feeling the thundering of his heart. "No," she said firmly. "Ella," Nico warned, his eyes not leaving Miller. "I can handle this," she said. She looked at Miller. "I will come with you voluntarily. I have nothing to hide." Nico grabbed her arm. "You are not going anywhere with them." "I have to. Nick," she whispered to him. "Trust me. Fight this with lawyers, not bullets. Please." Nico looked at her. He hated it. Every instinct in his body screamed to tear these men apart, but he saw the wisdom in her eyes. He nodded once, stiffly. "I will have the best legal team in the country at the station before you arrive," he promised. Ella walked out with the agents, her head held high. The interrogation lasted for 6 hours. They threatened her for 20 years. They tried to twist her words. They played recordings of Nico's voice. But Ella remained calm. She had a team of lawyers behind the glass who shut down every illegal question. But more importantly, she had the truth, or at least a version of it that was legally bulletproof. She looked Agent Miller in the eye. "I found a man bleeding on my porch," she stated clearly. "He told me his name was Nick. He said he was a victim of a robbery. I am a waitress, Agent Miller. I don't run background checks on people I help. I didn't know he was Nico Moretti until the day you walked into my diner. And by then, I was terrified for my life because the people hunting him were hunting me, too." She leaned forward. "I was a hostage of circumstance. You can't put me in jail for being a good Samaritan who got caught in a gang war." It was a narrative that walked the razor's edge of perjury, but it held. There was no proof she knew his identity earlier. There were no wiretaps of her conspiring. She was a clean, sympathetic citizen with no record. 3 days later, the charges were dropped due to lack of evidence. Nico was waiting for her on the steps of the courthouse. The press was there, cameras flashing, shouting questions about the mob boss and the waitress. Nico ignored them all. He walked down the steps, wrapped his coat around her shoulders, and guided her into the waiting limousine. "I told you I could handle it," Ella said, leaning back against the leather seat, exhausted. Nico looked at her with a mixture of awe and adoration. He took her hand, kissing the knuckles. "You are more dangerous than I am." 6 months later, the autumn leaves were turning gold and crimson in Red Harbor. The city was quiet, prospering under the iron-fisted but stable rule of the Moretti family. Nico took Ella to dinner at the finest restaurant in the city, a place that overlooked the harbor lights. He rented out the entire rooftop. Ella wore a dress of deep emerald green that hugged her curves, the fabric shimmering in the candlelight. Nico couldn't take his eyes off her. "You are quiet tonight," Ella noted, sipping her wine. Nico reached into his pocket. Ella's breath hitched. She expected a ring. She expected the traditional knee, the diamond the size of a grape, instead. Nico slid a small, heavy box across the table. Ella opened it. Inside lay a single, heavy iron key. It looked old, ancient even. She looked up at him, confused. "A key?" "It opens the vault in the basement of the family estate in Sicily," Nico said seriously. "Inside that vault is everything. The ledgers, the history, the locations of every account, every safe house, every buried secret of the Moretti bloodline going back 100 years. He reached across the table, covering her hand with his. "A ring is just jewelry," he said softly. "This is my life. This is the power to destroy me. If you ever decide to leave, if you ever decide I am too much, you can take this key and burn my entire world to the ground. I am giving you the power to end me, Ella, because I trust you with my life." Ella stared at the key. It was a proposal far heavier than marriage. It was an act of ultimate submission from a man who bowed to no one. He was handing her the trigger to the weapon that was his existence. She closed the box and held it tight against her chest. Tears pricked her eyes. "I don't want to destroy you, Nick," she whispered. "I just want to be with you." "Then keep it," he said. "Keep it safe. Keep me safe." "Yes," she said. "Yes." The final stop of the night was not the mansion. The black car rolled down the familiar, potholed streets of Ella's old neighborhood. It pulled up to the curb in front of the Victorian house. It looks different now. Nico had sent a crew to finish the repairs. The paint was fresh white, the porch railing was sturdy, and the roof was new. But the soul of the house remained. The windows were dark. "Why are we here?" Ella asked as they stepped out onto the sidewalk. It had started to rain, a soft, gentle drizzle that misted the air. "You said you missed it," Nico said. "I kept it for you. I bought the mortgage. It is yours. It will always be yours." Ella walked up the path. Her boots clicked on the stone. She remembered the night she had parked her car here, exhausted and wet, and found a dying man on the steps. She remembered the fear, the hesitation, and the compassion that had changed the trajectory of the entire city. She walked up the steps and stood on the porch. She turned to look at him. Nico stood on the bottom step, looking up at her. The rain caught in his dark hair, glistening on the shoulders of his coat. He wasn't wearing a hood tonight. He wasn't hiding. He took a step up, closing the distance, just as he had that first night. But this time, there was no blood. There was only love, dark, complex, and unbreakable. "You saved me right here," Nico said, his voice low, blending with the sound of the rain. "You opened your door." Ella smiled, her heart swelling until it felt like it might burst. "I thought you were a runaway." "I was," Nico admitted. He stepped up onto the porch, towering over her, shielding her from the wind. He reached out, cupping her face in his hands. "I was running from everything until I found you." He leaned in, his forehead resting against hers. "You let me sleep in your house," he whispered, the words a sacred echo of their beginning. "And I never left." "No," Ella whispered back, sliding her arms around his waist. "You never did." She stood on her tiptoes and kissed him. It was a kiss of arrival, of two wandering souls who had found their anchor in the storm. Nico opened the front door, and the warm light from the hallway spilled out onto the wet porch, illuminating them in a golden glow. He scooped her up into his arms, carrying her across the threshold. Ella laughed, the sound bright and free, as Nico kicked the door shut behind them, sealing out the rain, the world, and the past. They were home. Together now, for real. Thank you so much for listening to this story. It has been a pleasure to take you on this journey through the rain-soaked streets of Red Harbor with Nico and Ella. Writing their story of danger, obsession, and redemption was a truly immersive experience. I would love to know where you are listening from. Please leave a comment down below with your country or city. It is always amazing to see how far these stories travel. If you enjoyed this story, please consider subscribing to Mafia Romance Stories for more tales of dark passion, dangerous men, and the fierce women who tame them. Share your thoughts in the comments. Did you like how Ella handled the FBI? And what did you think of Nico's proposal with the key instead of a ring? I can't wait to read your feedback. Until next time.